Hello, my Juicy co-creators. Lilou here on the Juicy Living Tour. Today, I'm in wonderful, delicious, juicy Amsterdam with this beautiful sun with Pim Van Lommel. Hello.
Hello.
Good sitting with you here in the sunny Amsterdam. I've heard a lot about you, of course, with a lot of people and co-creators around the world had told me you have to interview this cardiologue, this Dutch cardiologue. He's amazing and he wrote these books and I wrote it and I love it. And please, and you wrote Consciousness Beyond Life. You published in the Lancet, which is a very well-known medical journal. Which year was that when you published the report?
In December 2001, it was published in the Lancet, our study.
And the exact study title was?
That was the near-death experience in survivors of cardiac arrest, a prospective study in the Netherlands.
Because that's what you are. You are a cardiologue, so you've studied that and you had a lot of patients and your patients were reporting those near-death experience. And so we're going to speak of near-death experience, of course, but you really brought some scientific proof to this whole equation. I would love to, before we get into the details and the scientific part, what is your perception on consciousness? Because I was describing to you right now the tour and what's happening around the world, and we were talking of really maybe the evolution of human beings too, what is happening. What is your feeling on all this? How do you define it?
I don't give a definition of consciousness because it has so many aspects, but you can say that by your consciousness, you create your own subjective reality, and by your intention, you can create the work you're doing. You create it yourself because of your consciousness. When you change your consciousness, you can change the world. That's what you are doing as well.
And what's, in a nutshell, really what our perception, our consciousness creates our reality. So if we're not open to any of this, then we'll have a total different experience of a whole situation, right? It's quite, that's amazing.
Yes. I always say, when you're in love, the world is beautiful. When you're depressed, the world is like hell. When you are a materialistic scientist, that is just matter, just external things, and you cannot measure consciousness, you cannot measure subjective experiences. So for those people, consciousness is just an illusion, while it's just the essence of who we are.
Let's get into that. Let's get into what happens when the heart stops.
Yeah. Well, what we know as a cardiologist, as a physician, that we know that when the heart stops, people lose the consciousness within seconds. When you measure the blood flow to the brain, it's 0 within 1 second. So there's no blood flow going to the brain. The clinical findings are that they lose their body reflexes. The body, it's just without functioning, and that's the function of the cortex of the brain. The brain stem reflexes are gone. The gag reflex, you can put a finger in someone's throat without problems. The cordial reflex, widened pupils who don't react on light anymore, their brain stem reflexes are gone. The breathing is gone because the breathing center is close to the brain stem. And then there have been studies done in humans and in animals models as well to measure the electrical activity of the brain, the EEG. And we see that the EEG is, on average, after 15 seconds, it's a flat line. So the brain doesn't function at all clinically within seconds, but within 50 seconds there's no electrical activity of the cortex anymore. The still never proven assumption is that consciousness is a product of brain function. So when patients have a cardiac arrest, when the brain doesn't function anymore after 10 to 15 seconds, it shouldn't be possible that patients have conscious experience and memories, because all those structures who underpin those kind of experience don't function anymore because there's no blood flow to the brain. And then still there are people who survive cardiac arrest by resuscitation.
What resuscitation is like? They were clinically dead?
Yeah, a cardiac arrest is called clinical death because patients with a cardiac arrest due to acute myocardial infarction are in the beginning of the phase of dying. And you have to start the resuscitation, defibrillation, external heart massage within 5 to 10 minutes. Otherwise, there is irreversible damage to the brain and people will die. So it's a kind of reversible period of the dying process. But the people are already dying. And in this process where you resuscitate early and adequate, people can come back. But still a lot of people die as well of cardiac arrest. But then you can have the opportunity to hear patients tell about the NDE. But in my experience, when I didn't ask for it, I never heard it. So you have to be open as a doctor and ask for it, take time for it. Otherwise people will be silent, because even for themselves it's an incredible experience beyond expectation.
What triggered you then? You had heard of it, a book?
Yeah. Well, no, the first time I ever heard about the near-death experience was in '69, when I started my specialization as a cardiologist. And the coronary care units were just so new. So before 45 years ago, 67, it was not possible to resuscitate patients. All patients with cardiac arrest died. We just forget it, 45 years ago. But this was one of the first coronary care units in Holland, and we resuscitated the patient with a cardiac arrest. And after about 4 minutes, he regained consciousness after several defibrillations. And we, as a resuscitation team, I was the doctor in charge. We were so happy that it was all new, that we succeeded. But the patient was extremely disappointed that he was back in his body. And he told me about a light, beautiful music, beautiful landscape. And I always say, I never forgot this event, but I didn't do anything with it. Until in 1986, I read a book by George Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow, where he describes his near-death experience that he had as a medical student in '43 when he died of a double pneumonia, and there were no antibiotics available at that time so easily. So he died. He was covered by a sheet, his body, and a nurse couldn't accept that his medical student died. So he persuaded a doctor in charge to give him an injection right into his heart from adrenaline, which was quite uncommon. But he regained consciousness after 9 minutes, and then he had an extensive near-death experience, very impressive. And later also he told it on university as a doctor, and one of the medical students was Raymond Moody, who started to study this, and he invented the terminology near-death experience, and he wrote this book, Life After Life, in '75. But I didn't know it, I didn't read it. And I didn't know at that time, in '69 also, I didn't know that this kind of experience has always been mentioned in all times, all cultures, all religions. So it was not new at all, but it was new for me.
Yeah. So later on you start doing your own study, and you discover that about 18, 19, 20% of people that have this heart, that stops, that have this and come back, had this near-death experience. What do they have? Tell us about that study, how you put it together, what does it prove?
Yeah.
How does it change the whole landscape, actually, of science?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of questions.
Yes.
Let's start.
As usual, I'm kind of like bubbling because it's so exciting, isn't it? I mean, how exciting is this to be sitting with a cardiologist and having these type of conversation? My goodness, times are changing.
Well, for me, it was new as well. So when I had read this book by George Ritchie, I just started to ask my patients who survived the cardiac arrest in the past if they could remember something from the period of unconsciousness. And to my big surprise, within 2 years, 12 out of 50 patients told me about their near-death experience. So then my scientific curiosity started to grow. It's a lot of noise now here.
Yeah, we have a beautiful plane over us. We might quite not hear it. And we also have the bells in the background.
They are beautiful, Westertoren. Yeah. Beautiful church. Yeah. So then my scientific curiosity started to grow, because as a medical student and as a doctor, I had always learned at university that consciousness is a product of brain function. So it is impossible, according to this theory, that people could have consciousness, let alone enhanced consciousness, during cardiac arrest. And there have been some retrospective studies, and people have said, well, this is just a result of anoxia of the brain, lack of oxygen in the brain, or neurotransmitters, or hallucinations or side effect of drugs or fear of death or just false memories or whatever. But have never been a real scientific study done. So we started in '88 a prospective study of 344 consecutive patients who survived cardiac arrest in 10 Dutch hospitals to look if we could find an explanation for the cause and content of the NDE. And we just had patients with cardiac arrest because they are clinical death. They are in the phase of dying. So it is a very strict medical, life-threatening condition. And we know if you don't resuscitate a patient, they will all die. And we know also these patients have no brain functions at all after 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And
so how they can still memorize? How could they still remember that they had these experiences? Like, where is it? Where is this memory coming from, is located?
yeah, well, according to current medical science, everything is located in the brain.
Yeah.
It's localized in the brain. So it shouldn't be possible. So we have to discuss again this never proven assumption that consciousness is a product of brain function, because the brain doesn't function anymore in patients who are clinical death. So the only way to explain it is the theory of continuity, or that is that the consciousness is always there. There's no beginning or end to consciousness, and the brain has just a function as a transceiver, transmitter, receiver, or interface. It has a facilitating function. It makes it possible to experience waking consciousness in our body, in our brain. But real, the non-local consciousness, which is consciousness without time, without space, in another higher realm, is always there, without beginning and end. And we just receive just a small part of it. And having this kind of experiences is not only happening with cardiac arrest, but the brain function is really not there anymore. But also another critical situation, like that children near drowning can have the same experiences, or women complications in childbirth, a lot of blood, but also in isolation or meditation or depression or existential crisis, but the brain function is normal. They can have the same kind of experiences. So that also what we found in our study as a result, that there is no psychological explanation like fear of death, no pharmacological explanation like side effect of drugs, and no physiological explanation like the lack of oxygen in the brain. Because only 18% of those patients had a near-death experience, and all patients had an oxy of the brain, lack of oxygen in the brain, because of the cardiac arrest. They all had been unconscious.
Beyond their beliefs, also beyond their religion, beyond their status, beyond their comprehension, their studies, all of that.
So children have the same experiences as adults, and Christians have the same experience as atheists. But they still try to find words for this ineffable experience, and this. So they try to interpret and vocalize this kind of experience by their own background, by their own religion, by their own culture. So children will use different words as adults, but will try to tell you the same aspects of elements of the NDE. And an atheist will find different words than a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist. But they try to find words for this ineffable experience.
Timeless, no space, pure love or light, beyond God.
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of elements. And the first thing that people tell us that the pain has gone. The pain of the traffic accident, the pain of the heart attack. They don't feel the body anymore. And they have the feeling, this is dead. I am dead now. And then they can have the possibility of a perception from a position out and above the body. They can see their own resuscitation from above, or their own operation from above. They can see theoretical details which you can corroborate later. Then they can come into a dark space which can be frightening for about 15%. They see a small point of light where they're attracted to. They mostly describe it as a tunnel. And through this tunnel they come in an otherworldly dimension without beautiful colors, beautiful landscapes, beautiful music. And they mostly see a being of light and light. And there's this unconditional love, wisdom. You know all the answers before asking the questions. And mostly in this being of light with incredible acceptance And the feeling of love is something we don't know here. It's far beyond what we know from love here.
Is it something they report right after when you get in the room and you start talking to them, or does it take a while before they even know that they're back in this body? Is there a time lapse like that? Because now near-death experiences are more and more shared. I mean, I'm wondering even how it's evolving through time, like from the first stories that you got to now where a lot of people are sharing their own. So there's probably some more common elements these days, or is it really the same core experience?
Yeah. But it's the same kind of experience. They also have made a study, Bruce Grace in the United States has made a study from reports of NDEs before 75, before the book Life After Life, and after 75. They still report the same elements. Plato has written 2,000 years ago about the soldier who had a near-death. He had told the same kind of elements with the words from that time. So it's the same kind of elements always. And in this light, or the being of light, they can see the life review. What this means, you relive the whole life. Each thought you ever had is kept with the influence on others. I always say, think about it, that each thought you ever had, each intent you ever have is kept. And you are connected with everything what you thought or did or said in the past. And you are connected with the feeling and emotions of others as well. So there's an interconnectedness. Someone said, as if I was seeing with all-seeing eyes. I felt everything. And then sometimes they can see also future events from personal life, which is incredible. Someone said, I have written it down. I could skip them off during the years because it all happened. Then they sometimes come to a border and they know if I cross this border, I will never come back. And then sometimes there's a communication like, it isn't your time yet, or if you have to fulfill. You have to do something still in life, and then they come back into the body, which is awful because you feel again the pain of and the restriction of your disease. So coming back is awful for them. That's the reason they're so disappointed to be back as well. And talking about it is also a huge problem because doctors don't believe it. No. Sisters don't believe it. They say, oh, it's just hallucination, it's just side effect of drugs. Tomorrow it's over. Here, you get some medication, etc.
You meet doctors, huh? You have met doctors, I guess. You went to some kind of reunions with some materialists.
Yeah. Well, first for myself, I never heard about the death experience because I didn't ask for it. Yeah. So you have to ask for it. You have to be open because they're so reluctant to talk about it. And I know about a conference about the death experience in a university hospital with more than 300 people in attendance, and there were lectures about NDE, and at the end one man stood up and said, I'm a cardiologist for more than 25 years. I've never heard such absurd stories. It is total nonsense and don't believe one word for it. Then another man stood up and said, I'm one of your patients. Yeah. I had a near-death experience. You should be the last one I would ever tell. They feel and know that these kind of doctors are not open to listen. So they're silent. So these kind of doctors will never hear about it.
How do you deal with that? Because I know this is something we all face to some degrees. You have this scientific understanding and you have those stories that came to you. I mean, how do you deal with that, this kind of reactions of your colleagues, of peers? How do you deal with it and how do you bring it into reality? I guess part of you wants to really make it tangible for them.
I never try to convince people. Yeah. Never. If they don't believe, then they have a problem. Yeah. I will never try to convince them. I have the facts, I have our findings, I have my, let's say, my theories about how I could explain this kind of experience with the approach of non-locality of consciousness, the brain just being a facilitator, not a producer of consciousness. And I lecture a lot also for medical students. I lecture a lot in hospitals, hospices, and there's still a lot of people more and more getting open, but there's still being a lot of physicians who are not open, don't want to be open. I always say it's prejudice and willful ignorance, because if it would be true what I am telling them, the whole world view would collapse, and they don't want it, and I accept it. I don't want them to be frightened because of the worldview they have. So time.
You continue. You do your lectures because I know you travel a lot, and you just came back from Brussels.
I've lectured all over the world.
Yeah.
I got it's always sold out. It's and a lot of people just are so open for it now, and I'm very positive. It's changing. And there are more and more people who can tell us about it because of the modern techniques of resuscitation. More and more people will survive cardiac arrest, will survive critical medical situations. But also more and more people are doing meditation or mindfulness and will change also their own state of consciousness as well. More and more people are willing to share this intuitive sensitivity with others. So openness helps. But it's still a problem in the Western world to talk about these kind of experiences because people are not open for it.
Let's talk of neuroplasticity, DNA, the junk DNA, what scientists call junk DNA, and quantum physics. How are those, what are some of the openings, insights that you had regarding those?
But let's first start with neuroplasticity. If there is non-local consciousness, that means that everything is connected without time, without space. And people with the intuitive sensitivity still have this feeling to be connected with other people, connected with our endangered planet, connected with animals, with plants, etc. They're just interconnected because their threshold for consciousness has been changed. Their reception ability has been enhanced. So we receive information from others. It's the non-local information exchange, as we call it. They receive information not by the senses, not by their body. And we know now that this consciousness can also change matter or structures. So we can change also our brain function, which is neuroplasticity, where we do meditation, or the structure and our function of our brain will change. And we can measure it with EEG of fMRI of PET scan. We can see the permanent changes in the brain in people who do long-term meditation. We also see changes in the brain when they use just meditation for 6 weeks. We see changes in the brain with mindfulness training. We see changes in the brain with placebo, where people believe that they get medication for, let's say, chronic pain patients or depression patients or patients with Parkinson's disease. They improve by just having the idea that they get medication. And you see the changes in the brain by PET scan and fMRI as well. You see more with Parkinson's patients, you see more dopamine in the brain. There comes dopamine because they believe that they receive medication. So changes in consciousness brings changes in the body and the brain. And then you also come to the body as a whole. I believe that DNA has also an interface function or reception function.
Another beautiful plane. Woo! We can definitely hear it because this is a unidirectional mic, so yeah, we can.
So we know from DNA that 4% has a function and 96% is called junk DNA because we don't know what it is, and I don't believe that nature will make any junk. So it must have a function we don't know yet. And I think this junk DNA has a reception ability, as also is receiving information from this non-local realm. And it can be morphogenetic information, it can be love, it can be what we call unconscious, subconscious information. If you realize that when a new creature is born, created by the egg cell and the spermatozoa, then there is a new DNA, a specific person, specific DNA in the world. And when there have been 4 cell divisions, cells are changing into heart cells, nerve cells, skin cells, eye, whatever. The structure of the DNA in all the cells is the same, but the function is changing. We have about more than 100 different functions of cells in our body. The structure is the same. So what makes the function of the DNA change? This is information from outside. This is non-local information. So we receive this kind of morphogenetic information, whatever you would call it, morphogenetic consciousness into our body. So DNA, for me, and also we know from epigenetics that the structure for the DNA is the same, but the function will change because of information we receive from outside. So and it's also genetic. So when you got information from your grandparents, your children will have it as well. So this information from outside comes into a change in function of the DNA. So surroundings are also very important. And then you asked me about quantum physics.
About the observer, huh?
Yeah.
Which we kind of started this conversation at the beginning of this interview with.
Exactly. Well, the quantum physics has changed our worldview. It has taken 60 to 80 years before it was accepted. Because until that time, the last centuries, has been the Newtonian physics, but everything is local, causal, local, etc. And with quantum physics, there's no matter anymore. Matter is emptiness, and matter is 99.999% vacuum. And this vacuum is filled with energy and information. It's a totally different view. And what we know from quantum physics is that the consciousness of the scientist defines the result of the experiments. So we can prove that light behaves as particles, and we can prove that light behaves as waves. Both is true, but it cannot be both true. It's complementary. So the consciousness of the experiment causes the result. So we can ask, how is objective science possible when the subjective aspects, the consciousness of the experiment, is so important? So I think we lost the idea that science can be objective. And also the problem with the old-fashioned materialist science is that the only thing that exists is what we can measure, what we can duplicate, what we can reproduce. And then they have a problem with consciousness. We cannot prove consciousness. We cannot measure consciousness. We cannot prove what somebody feels or thinks. We cannot scientifically prove that someone is in love or is. So the problem with consciousness, we cannot prove it. So we have to change our definition of science. We have to include subjective experiences as well. The first person experience is also not only our physical world. It's more than that. We are more than our physical beings. I always say we have a body, but we are conscious. And death is just the end of our physical aspects. Without the body, we still can have conscious experience. We still are conscious beings without the body. And that's what we have learned from studies from NDEs.
Do you see with your travel, you have received a Lifetime Award, Life Achievement Award in India, in New Delhi. You travel all around. I do too on the Juicy Tour. I feel this is happening all over the place, all different countries, all backgrounds. People are you excited about these times? Is it really happening? Or do you think we're actually thinking it's happening, but not really, because that's what we so much want to see? What is your perception on that?
I'm very positive. I think the last 10 years or 5 years, people are more and more getting open. And also my book, which was published in 2008, and 2007, this was translated into English, but when it was in Holland, it was a bestseller. It was nominated for the Book of the Year 2008 about this subject. So it was incredible what happens. And it's also a bestseller in Germany. So people are more and more open, and they want to read about it, and they want to listen, and they want to know more about it. So it's especially the young people. I'm very positive. But when I lecture to medical students, they're far more open than the physicians of my age.
Beautiful. Is there something else that is important in this conversation for you to express and say, knowing that this really reaches people all around the world and people are looking for this type of inspiration? You represent for them, as you know, a big piece of this puzzle.
Well, I think the main thing is that we have this subjective experience which we cannot prove. But we can have the objective parts of this experience. One is that we did in our prospective study, our longitudinal study, to see if the transformation, the change of life inside, the loss of the fear of death, and enhanced intuitive sensitivity is a result of the cardiac arrest or as a result of the NDE. What we found, it's only the result of the NDE. So the transformation is the result of the NDE. Also in children, we see the same transformation.
Because they're alive.
They also, when they under the age of 4, most children don't remember the content of the NDE, but they all have the transformation. They are highly intuitive, highly intelligent. So they're totally different as other children. I've written a whole chapter about it. But the other thing is that people ask me, how can we prove that this kind of NDE happens during cardiac arrest? Why not in the first or last seconds? Then you have the corroboration of theoretical aspects of the out-of-body experiences, which is important. Like the case of the dentures, what we call, what were published in the Lancet. There was in a Dutch hospital, a 44-year-old man was brought into hospital into coma. He was found in coma somewhere in the city, and the people didn't start adequate resuscitation. So when he was brought to the hospital, he was cyanotic. His body was already a little bit cold. Was in deep coma, no breathing, no heartbeat, no blood pressure, and the nurse who was in charge was trying to intubate the patient to give him more oxygen. And he found out that the patient had dentures in the mouth, so he took out his dentures and put them somewhere on the crash cart. And they needed 1.5 hours of resuscitation before they had a blood pressure and heart rhythm again. Because he was young, they tried a long time. But then he still was in coma. He still needed artificial respiration, was still intubated. So he was transferred to the intensive care unit for artificial respiration, where he was another 1 week in coma. And when he regained consciousness, he was transferred back to the cardiac ward. And he was just there when a nurse came in. He saw the nurse and said, "You know where my dentures are." And he recognized the nurse, and he could tell exactly the nurse where he had put his dentures, somewhere underneath a sliding drawer in the crash cart. He could describe the resuscitation room where he was brought into in coma, where he was transferred outside in coma. He could describe it correctly from a position out and above his own body. He could see his own resuscitation. Who could recognize the appearances like the nurses and the doctors who were involved in the CPR. So this is a kind of corroboration of theoretical aspects. And recently a study was published by Jan Holden, where she had found about 100 cases of corroboration of theoretical perceptions. And 90% of these perceptions were totally 100% true. 8% had a small error and only 2% were false, which means what they have seen, what they have perceived, was really there. And then it is by definition no hallucination, no illusion, no delusion, because it really happens what they saw. It's so important. Mm-hmm. Other aspects is that I know a story of a man who saw deceased relatives in his near-death experience, like his deceased grandmother and a man he didn't know. But he looked at him, this man looked at him lovingly, but didn't know who it was. And 10 years later, at the deathbed of his mother, she confessed to him that he was born out of an extramarital relationship. His father being a Jewish man who was murdered in the Second World War. And she showed him a picture. And the man he had seen 10 years before in the near-death experience happened to be his biological father. Well, this is a kind of objective proof that what he really saw 10 years before was his biological father. He didn't know there was one.
Ibn Alexander and Dr. Ibn Alexander had something similar with his sister. Huh?
Exactly. It's the same. So,
if you haven't seen that interview, by the way, please go and check it out. Dr. Ibn Alexander, wonderful book on the proof of heaven.
It's a wonderful book, yes. So these kind of aspects are important for the people who are still reluctant to believe that these things can happen. And when I started, I was reluctant to believe it as well. Yeah. But my scientific curiosity changed into a kind of inner knowing that this is the only truth there is. It's all about consciousness. It's all about, and our physical aspects is just a temporary aspects of who we are, but we are consciousness.
Would you say that now, these days, your heart is more open than ever Is there also a correlation between the heart and the openness of the heart and consciousness and living and being open and receiving and sharing and living really this juicy life?
Yeah. I think we always try to connect our heart also with other aspects of consciousness, or of love or whatever, and that's a kind of old-fashioned way of thinking. I think our whole body is a receiver as well, but perhaps our heart receives more aspects like love, but I don't know. But I'm far more open for it, and people are open to me as well. I resonate with them when they tell these very impressive emotional stories about Andy and the trauma it is for them to have it in this Western world. It's just a positive experience, extremely positive, but it's a trauma to have it because you cannot share it with others. People won't believe it. More than 50% gets a divorce because they said, it's not the same partner I was married with. Doctors don't believe you. Family, friends don't believe you. And so it's years and years of depression, homesickness, and loneliness. So it's not that easy at all to have this kind of experiences.
You get shut down from that experience.
It's I know patients who have been silent for more than 50 years. They didn't tell at all about this kind of experience. So that happens as well.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited. My delicious co-creators, if you haven't read Conscious Beyond Life, there's many also reports and documentaries on you on the internet. You're really, really active. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing and coming and meeting me here in Amsterdam. I so appreciate after giving a conference yesterday in Brussels. It really shows how committed you are and still are so committed. Thank you, Pim.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Your job is also very important. You help people that it's possible to be open, to get more open. So that's important.
Thank you. And to you, all my beautiful, juicy co-creators around the world, thank you for watching this beautiful interview and sharing it with your friends and family and loved ones. I send you much, much love. Thank you for your support. Big kisses. Mwah.